All right, we are going to dive headfirst into color correcting our photographs. These next couple steps are very, very crucial. These are the foundational level steps in which you are going to be building your edits off of, right? So the first thing that we're going to do is we are going to figure out our black and our white points in our photograph. We're going to find out what's the brightest pixel and what's the darkest pixel in our photograph, and then we're going to set a value to those. And we're going to set a value to those so that they become what is considered neutral. So a neutral is an even distribution of the colors that make up black or white in a process. In a digital process, it is a subtractive process, which means 0, 0, 0, the lack of any color. And in digital process, we're always mixing 3 colors, or in a screen process, red, green, blue. So if there's an absence of red, green, blue, 0, 0, 0, we have absolute black. The most we can get is 255. So if we had 255, 255, 255, so 255 red, 255 green, 255 blue, we have white. So that's our scale right there. If we can make black neutral, i.e. having those 3 numbers equal each other, and have white be neutral, then everything in between those will be neutral. And that's what we want to do. We're doing these steps, this next step, not to make our photo look exactly how we want it, but to neutralize the color in our photos so that we can then make the changes we want in a controlled way. So remember, this is foundational level stuff. So to do that, we're going to use a tool which is called a threshold layer. So I am going to go Layer, New Adjustment Layer, Threshold. And I'm just going to click that. And when this new layer pops up, just hit OK. Okay, now our photo turns into this crazy black and white thing, and we have our histogram up here. Now, before I get going too deep, I want to change a setting in Photoshop. If you're using the computers on campus, you're going to want to do this every time you use this tool. If you're using Photoshop on your own computer, if you set it once, you won't have to do this again. I've done it on my computers, but I can go in and fake it here. So I'm going to go Photoshop, and I'm going to go Preferences, Cursors. Okay, so once it brings up my cursors, by default, the other cursors is on standard. We want it to be on precise, because in this step of this process, we are really going to be picking 1 pixel to be our darkest pixel, and 1 pixel to be our lightest pixel. So we want to be precise with this. So you don't need to change your painting cursors. You just change your other cursor from standard to precise and hit OK. And once again, if you're doing it on your own computer, you only have to do that once. You never have to do it again. Okay, so now how we're going to use the threshold layer is just showing us the information that make up our image. And if we scroll over on our histogram, right, if I scroll to the right, it's going to show me just the brightest pixels. So just those white pixels that it's showing me up on the top, those are the brightest pixels in my photograph. So I'm just going to bring this until there's just very few of those left, something like that. Okay, so it looks like the brightest pixels in our photos, in this photo, is 234, which is nowhere near white, right? 255 is white. But if we look at this photo, it's like, yeah, there's a black and there's a white in this photo. But guess what? There's not. There's actually not an absolute white and there's not an absolute black. But we never want, well, I shouldn't say never. We usually never want an absolute white in our photograph. We usually always want an absolute black in our photograph. We want a near absolute white and an absolute black. Okay, I know that gets a little confusing. So with this threshold layer on, right, remember we can turn off these layers just by hitting this icon next to them. We have just displayed up here is just the pixels that are right here on the histogram. These are our brightest pixels in our photograph. So I'm going to zoom into that part of the photo by going Command+. I'm going to grab the hand icon by holding down the space bar, or you can always go to the navigator and cruise up like that. And notice I'm zooming into this, right, because we're on the pixel level. These pixels are going to represent our lightest pixels in our photograph. So I want to mark these pixels so I know that these are the lightest pixels. So to mark them, I'm going to go over here and I'm going to grab my eyedropper tool, which is the 6th tool from the top. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yep, 6th tool from the top. The keyboard shortcut is I. I'm just going to click that. And I'm going to float inside of these white pixels, anywhere inside of these pixels. All this white is given the same value on the histogram, so it doesn't matter which one you pick, but you want to make sure that you're firmly in that white. And I want to drop a marker on this point. And this is why we selected that precise cursor, because without the precise cursor, we wouldn't know what exact pixel we're picking. That's really hard to say. Where this cursor, I can tell this is the exact one I'm picking, right where the crosshairs are. And I'm going to drop a marker by having my eyedropper tool, holding down Shift, Option, and click. Now when I do that, I now have a little marker there. If I turn off the threshold layer, that marker is still there with a number 1. That's going to be my brightest pixel. If you drop it in a place that you didn't want it, you can always go Shift, Option, float over the top, and you'll see the scissors icon, and cut it out of there, and then it's removed. But I do want it there, so I'm going to go Shift, Option, click. That's going to be my brightest pixel. So now I'm going to zoom out to like right there, and I am going to go back to Properties, and I am going to scroll my histogram over to find out what is my darkest pixel. So remember, I'm scrolling over towards the darkness here, and we're at like, what is that, 19. And remember, 0 is absolute black. So this photo, even though it looks like there's an absolute black and absolute white, there's not. So right there, I see some of this information down there, so I'm going to zoom into it, grab my hand icon by holding down the space bar. I'm going to zoom into this piece right here. And right, you would want to bring it all the way down until there's just very little left. You wouldn't want to do this all the way here, because we're trying to find really the darkest pixels in your image. That looks good to me. Actually, let's bring this down a little bit more, something like that. So I'm going to zoom in here. Right, I'm zoomed into 3200%. That's pretty huge. And I'm going to drop another marker by having my eyedropper tool, Shift, Option, and click. And remember, if I don't want it there, Shift, Option will bring the scissors and cut it out. But I do want it there. It looks good to me. So now if I zoom out, I have 2 markers that I used, or that I dropped. What we're doing with the threshold layer is we're finding the darkest pixel and the lightest pixel in our image. And we can tell by this histogram right here, our image doesn't have anywhere near white in it and pretty much nowhere near black in it. So now we know what are the brightest and lightest, and now we're going to make them absolute black and near absolute white. So we're done with the threshold layer. That's really all we're going to use it for. So I'm just going to turn it off by hitting the eye icon. And notice that my markers are still there. Sometimes they're hard to see, like this one down here is hidden. That's my darkest pixel. That's my lightest pixel. So I just use the threshold layer to find those 2 points. Now what I want to do is I want to set the value of those 2 points. To do that, we're going to use a curve. So I'm going to go Layer, New Adjustment Layer, Curve. And once the new layer window pops up, just hit OK. So a lot of you have probably used curves before in Photoshop. We're going to use this curve differently. Usually how you use curves is you go up to the Curve Properties window and you bend this line. We do not want to click and bend this line. That's not what we're doing with this layer. This is the biggest, most important step in color correcting by setting a neutral absolute black and a neutral near absolute white. And the reason that I want an absolute black is you want that full range of contrast. The reason I don't want an absolute white is if you post an image on a website with a white background and say this sky is absolute white, what happens to your photo? All of a sudden it becomes not a rectangle because the white of the sky blends in with the white of the background of the website. Or if you print your photo on a white piece of paper, the white sky will blend in with the white border. So we want some type of delineation between the brightest highlight in your photo and the paper white of a piece of paper on a print or the white of a website. I hope that makes sense to you. It's like the #1 rookie move in photography is when you have like a blown out sky, it's paper white and it's printed on a piece of paper and it blends into the border. You don't see a clean rectangular border anymore. So to set the value of these points, I'm going to use these eyedroppers right here. So this is the black eyedropper, this is the white eyedropper, and in the middle is the gray point eyedropper. We don't need the gray point eyedropper, we're just going to use the black point and the white point. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use the black point. So I'm going to double click on the top eyedropper, the black point eyedropper. I'm going to double click on it, and that opens the Color Picker Target Shadow Colors dialog box. Always hard to say. By default, this is always set up like this. Remember, we're mixing RGB, and we want them to be neutral. Neutral means there's an equal amount of them. And in this case, it's 0, 0, 0. If we had blue set to 1, right, so we have red 0, green 0, blue 1, it's going to look black, but it's not neutral, right? Because there's 1 point more blue than green and red. Now, to our bare eyes, we're not going to see that. But remember, we're building a foundation here. We want that foundation to be level, right? Because we're going to build onto it, right? It's just like in construction. If your foundation is a little bit off level, even if you can't see with your bare eyes, by the time you get to the 30th floor, you're going to have your building fallen over. Same thing with editing photos. So by default, absolute black is always set at 0, 0, 0. That's what we want, because remember, we always want there to be an absolute black in a photograph. So I'm going to zoom into my marker that marks my darkest pixel, and I'm going to float my cursor right over the top of it. You want to be precise with this, because what you're doing is you're setting the value of that precise pixel to 0, 0, 0. So once you're over the top, you're just going to click, and notice that my photo just changed, right? Look how much it changed. So my black was nowhere, or my darkest pixel was nowhere near black, nor was it neutral. So now this pixel is worth 0, 0, 0, absolute black. So now I know there's an absolute black in my photograph. So now if I zoom in up here to my brightest pixel, I want to set the value to be near absolute white, but have a little bit of tonality to separate it from the background of a website or a piece of paper. So I'm going to double click on my white eyedropper tool. There it is. And by default, these are set to 255, 255, 255. That by default, that's what it looks like. And once again, if you're on your own computer, you only have to set this once. If you're using a community computer, you're going to have to set it every time. 255, 255, 255 is neutral, absolute white, no detail. We don't want that. We want there to be a little bit of delineation between the highlights in our photo and a piece of paper or a white website. So I'm going to go 249, 249, 249. Now we have a near absolute white that's a neutral. These three numbers are the same. And hit OK. Save the new target colors as default. Yep, that's what I want to do. And then I'm going to float right over the top of this pixel. Make sure I'm pretty precise with it. You might want to zoom in a little bit. I'll zoom in. And click. So it just changed my photo a little bit. It brightened up that sky. Because remember, my sky was nowhere near absolute white. So before, let's go before and after by turning the preview off. Here's before. It looks pretty flat. And that's how my camera makes images. Cameras are not intended to make an image that looks perfect. It needs editing. I always think it's funny. I have students that say, oh, I don't even need to edit my photos. That's like saying, like, you're such a good baker that you don't have to, you mix all the batter together and you never have to put it in the oven, right? This is a needed step to make your photos look how you want them to look. So with that curve on, we now have an absolute black that is neutral and a near absolute white that is neutral. Everything in between is now also neutral. That's what we want. This might not be how you want your photo to look, but this is the foundation, right? We just built the foundation. So this is a very, very important step you have to do to every single one of your photos. So in the next video, I'm going to cover what's called the luminosity curve, where we're going to be adjusting contrast without changing color because we just corrected the color. Okay, see you there.